Greetings, everybody. No doubt about it, if your company has employees, you have shadow IT. According to a survey conducted by Straightcast and Frost and Sullivan, 80% of employees say that they use applications on the job that aren't approved by IT. My name is Farooq Naiyer, and I'm the CISO at Orion. And the topic of our today's session is shadow IT the root of all evils? I have a distinguished panel with me, and I would like to introduce them first before I go into the conversation. And I'd like to start off with Sandra.
Thanks, Farooq. Hi, I'm Sandra Liepkalns. I'm VP of Information Security at Choice Properties. I have over 25 years of experience in information security, designing secure architecture, security awareness, DevOps, and I recently traded digital properties for physical properties.
Amazing. Okay, Ali Shahidi.
Good afternoon. This is Ali Shahidi, and I'm with Ontario Health as the Director of Information Security and Privacy. Been in the domain of IT and security for over 20 years, and pretty much in public and private sector all across the board, and education sector, and been pretty much into the woods all the time.
And Michael Ball.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. So I'm Michael Ball, and I'm a virtual CISO with Team CISO. I've got 30 years experience in IT security, most of it with large corporations. In the past 5 years, we've decided to move into building security frameworks for small business and supply chain.
Thank you. Glad to have you all here as part of the conversation. So before I dive into the conversation, just want to talk a bit about the concept of shadow IT. Set the foundation for this conversation. So shadow IT is an umbrella term referring to any technology, be it an application, device, smartphone, tablet, deployed within an organization without the approval of IT or department. At times, people often say without the knowledge of the IT department. It's completely unknown to them. Mm-hmm. And IT departments are often unaware that these applications are being used by either individuals, individual employees, departments, or entire business unit. And shadow IT itself brings up security, integration, and operational challenges in companies. And of course, there's a positive side to it also. So today we are going to be discussing both sides of the story. I mean, what are the positive aspects? What are the negative aspects? What are the challenges? And how to keep up with the fast pace of the evolution of technology and also at the same time, meeting the needs of the business. So I think the first question which I want to start off this conversation by is about talking about just getting your opinion about the fact that why do users and departments turn to shadow IT? I would like to start off with Ali, since you're working for the healthcare sector. What's your take on this?
Well, there are multiple reasons, but I think the very main reason is that usually the staff and the employees are looking for solutions, and that brings some sort of need that sometimes the IT departments are not basically flexible enough to provide them the needed tools they need. At the same time, they are looking for, they want to do their jobs. And the reality is that they are trying to come up with an easy solution that can help them to achieve what they want to do. At the same time, that easy solution can become a more complicated solution that is at the same time, not for them, but for the overall organization. So at the end of the day, most of this, and it's not just the user part, I can mention this, I have seen it actually across the board in different organizations, even within the government agencies, that even the departments do that. And let's say HR needs an HR tool or solution. And especially since we have the cloud become more and more open to our operation, then and most of these solutions are as a SaaS or as a PaaS, whatever we pick from the cloud. They are going to, and they simply say, okay, I'm just subscribing to a solution over the cloud, without considering the fact that This is a new technology within the environment, regardless of where it's sitting and where it's being hosted. So that's where most of the problems come. And again, not being synchronized and basically in parallel with the IT department's policies and procedures regarding introduction of new technology into the organization, and they're thinking that they are doing it not in a bad intentions. Their intentions are good. It's just a matter of they are picking that solution for doing their jobs rather than going to the IT and asking the IT department to help them to pick the right solution. And even the solution might exist, but they are not aware of that. So,
like you said.
yeah.
Okay. Sandra, what's your perspective on this?
Well, I think it's about communication as well. You know, a lot of times the IT department is looked at that they aren't as approachable. Generally, IT, you know, IT and security are the ones who always say, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. And so it's really, you know, creating a collaborative relationship with the business, because probably if one of the business users is looking for an application, and if it's a software as a service, there's probably numerous other departments that could possibly benefit for it. But it's really, you know, understanding what the needs of the business are, then going through the vigorous testing and you know, screening of these applications, because we all have to remember, you know, it all involves data. You know, what type of data are we storing in these applications? So and whether it's secured properly, where is it located, all the vendor management aspects of it. And you know, if it's a small application, it's usually, you know, the users need something immediately. They're not thinking too much about it, and generally, you know, when breaches do happen in those third parties, then things start to come to light. So it's really starting to build those bridges, much better bridges with the businesses, and making sure that IT, you know, is approachable, that you can call them up and say, hey, I'm looking at doing something. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, rightly said. Now, Michael, you have worked on both sides of the fence. I mean,
Yep.
as you're on the consulting side, you've been working within organizations too. But just want to add another spin to this question, and the spin is that, I mean, is it more to do with business needs evolving over time? Is it about the technology advancements? Is it about speed to market? What are the key factors which are driving departments and users to start to turn towards shadow IT?
Yeah, so certainly agility is a big part of it. So, you know, the businesses have to move faster than they perceive IT can help them. But the other part is their peers in other businesses and their partners are going to suggest tools and systems that they should be using, right? So that's a part. But one of the things that I've noticed is when you're talking to these people, they don't even realize that when they're going to this new website and they put their credentials in and they sign up for it, that it's an application. You know, when you ask them what applications are you using, they won't even perceive in their head that these 5 website tools that they're using are applications. You know, so it becomes difficult, you know, so from our side, not only do we have to befriend them and work with them on, you know, understanding what applications they're using, but we need to be monitoring our systems. Where are people going? What's being used? You know, what systems are our firewalls and our URL filtering going to understand what's being used?
Yeah, and I think the common message that I'm hearing is more to do with convenience. I mean, businesses and users are turning towards shadow IT for convenience, and they are perhaps not realizing that there is risk associated in accessing these services. And I think, as Sandra highlighted, there is data risk attached to it, and that's a good segue to my next question. And my next question uh, is about the fact that, do you see this as a risk? And if you do see this as a risk, what type of a risk are we talking about? So I'd like to turn to Sandra and just hear your perspective on that.
Well, it definitely is a risk. You know, you have to look at it from a data governance perspective. And actually going back to, you know, our business partners are also using different tools as well. So it's not just the shadow IT from the perspective of, well, I need to use an application or something, a tool that's going to help me out. It's actually, shadow IT is also partially of sharing with your business partners, your associates, because they're using third-party applications from a collaborative perspective as well. So it's IT knowing about those as well. And it's understanding where the data is going. It's about having data governance. As Michael talked about, having the tools in place to understand and analyze where people are going, what are they doing, and from a risk perspective, you kind of have to look at what is the data that's being stored. Is it confidential information? Is it high risk? Is it PII? Is it, PHI? There's all these different components. If there's no personal information being stored and let's take a survey tool. If you're just going to be using it from a survey perspective, no personal information ever is going into it. The first thing people say is, well, I'll just sign up for the free one. And everybody does it in every department. They do it all the time. But, stepping back to say, okay, from a corporate perspective, yes, we need these types of tools, but let's actually go get a paid version. So we have a subscription in place. We've read the contracts. We understand where the data residency is. We understand all of those components. So at least we have a better understanding and control over it. And that way, you know where things are.
So can I speak to that, Sandra?
Yeah.
So I remember negotiating with Box on getting a corporate license to bring Box into the company. And in the negotiations, they said, by the way, would you like to know the 1,400 of your employees who have signed up for private, access using their corporate account?
Right. And that happens all the time. If you're, you're going through a mobile device management and you've got, Apple IDs, the same thing. As soon as you start integrating from a corporate perspective, those start getting revoked. And then, you see how many people have actually signed up with their corporate IDs. It's one thing to, the one thing we always stress is, business is for business purposes, personal is for personal, but they do end up crossing. And so, then you find out all of the user IDs that are being used in places. And that's not just, our current organizations that we're working in, that's, our previous ones, and everybody is doing that or has done that. And it's, trying to regain control back over your corporate ID and your corporate email accounts and credentials.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you just touched on the fact that there is a significant data risk or data governance risk associated with shadow IT, especially when it comes to the type of data that is being handled, be it PHI, be it PII, or be it payment card information too. And
that as well.
Yeah, and I just like to quote one instance. I mean, in the higher education sector, they use a third-party software, third-party point-of-sale software at the bookstores, and one of that solutions got breached last year, and the vendor issued a statement saying that, yeah, well, we had a vulnerability which got exploited, but but we still are a PCI compliant application. And I said, well, if you had a vulnerability which was exploited, guess what? You're not PCI compliant anymore. So I think, it's at times it becomes subjective, but I think third-party service providers should be made accountable to some extent, not to some extent, to a great extent. And that brings me to this the second part of this question. Like Sandra, you highlighted that there is significant data risk associated with that. So I'd like to turn this to Michael. And Michael, do you think that there are other risks associated with shadow IT just beyond data governance or data risk?
Well, so from a business financial perspective, if you've got a large corporation with multiple business units and they've all gone out for their own tool to do the same thing, then you got duplicities of, how the same data is being used in different ways. There's no integrity. There's no back end ability to share and analyze that data, amongst the business units. It just having some standardization within the company is critical as well.
Yeah. Okay. Good point.
And the cost of those tools as well. So it's one thing if it's all free,
Yeah.
but if you're starting to pay and you have multiple accounts, there's costs associated with doing that as well.
Okay, so I'd like to turn this over to Ali. Ali, you've been working with the healthcare sector, and when we're working in the healthcare sector, we talk a lot about compliance risk. We're talking about regulatory compliance when it comes to HIPAA. You might be some touch points with HIPAA if you're dealing with any US service provider or dealing with that, and then payment card risk too. So how would you look at this? And is there any other risk you want to talk about as it comes to healthcare in particular?
Well, Sandra mentioned the data residency is one of the major ones that we have problem with. And unfortunately, especially in the healthcare sector, when we look at it, I'm talking about the provincial level, we would see that it's not just a centralized type of service that we are providing. And there are multiple players in there, all the way from the smaller players. I'm talking about the organizations with 2, 3, even laptops. All the way going to the larger organization, the government agencies. And the biggest challenge we have, as Sandra mentioned, is that the concept of, again, data residency, that's one of them. And the other one is the access, basically data access and access rights and access controls that are in place. I think the biggest challenge we are dealing with is, especially again, going back to the cloud concept, is the misperception and misunderstanding of the security around the cloud services that we are receiving. And most of this, I have been dealing with this actually pretty much on maybe not daily basis, at least per week, 2, 3 times. We get to the situations that we come back with, we need to provide guidance and direction to some of the service providers, to the government agencies that we are talking about. I'm talking about to the hospitals, to the LINs, or any other agency that they say, oh, you know what, we have a collaborative tool that we have found and we want to use it for our patient delivery type of services that they are involved with. And we are lucky actually that they turn to us and ask for our guidance. But there are many of them they don't do that. And what happens is that they don't look at the potentials that those service providers or cloud service providers, they are pretty much providing at the edge type of security. And that's, again, misperception of the sense of, or false sense of security that they have from the cloud. They think, oh, you know what? If I move my operation to the cloud, I'm secure, then that's it, I have no problem. Where they don't realize that there is no monitoring, there is no access control in place, they don't know who's accessing those data, even at the administration level of the service providers and all of those. So there are, in addition to what Michael and Sandra mentioned about the even business side of it, the access and monitoring and auditing such access and basically who's doing what with those data, because that's the crown jewel that we are trying to protect, data. And if we don't have any type of monitoring and good sense of all of these securities around that bubble, then the reality is that we are just putting our assets into this big black hole somewhere that we don't know where it's sitting and how it's being managed and accessed.
Yeah, right. So let's switch gears now and let's talk about what's happening these days and the current threat landscape and how have things changed in the past 7 to 8 months. And I'm talking about the new normal. We live in a day and age where almost 70 to 80% of the workforce is still working from home. Attack surface has increased. People who were working initially within the secure perimeters of the organization are now working from the comfort of their couches, and they are probably within a perimeter which is not as secure as their office network. So all that has changed and evolved. And what is often said about the current scenario is that the use of shadow IT or convergence towards shadow IT has increased exponentially during these past 7 to 8 months. And surprisingly, there is not much visibility over it. I mean, there are tools and technologies over there. I mean, people are talking about MDM, people are talking about endpoint. I know Cisco has a tool called a Cisco Umbrella, which does provide some kind of visibility of endpoint traffic. But these are just tools, and as Ali rightly said, that uh, tools often create a false sense of security or some other things too. But uh, the question that I have for the panel right now is a pretty tricky one. And the question is that, is it possible to have adequate oversight on shadow IT, or perhaps any kind of oversight over shadow IT? So I'd like to turn to Michael over here. Michael, what's your take on this and what do you feel about it?
Yeah, so I will admit I'm a little biased in this region. I did some work a number of years ago on CASB, Cloud Access Security Brokers. And so it is a solution, works with your identity provider and does all that filtering outside of your corporate perimeter. However, they're not in well use at the moment. So even though the technology's 6-7 years old, they're not being utilized at the moment. So it's there, we're just not using them.
Okay. Sandra?
Well, Farooq, you talked about Cisco Umbrella. So it works regardless of whether you're in the corporate network or not. So, utilizing tools like that, as well as having MDM solutions in place, at least help understand where people are going, the shadow IT that is out there, and you can control where people are actually going to. When you're looking at mobile device management solutions for phone systems, you can have two separate containers. You can have a corporate one and you can have a personal one. And so there are ways of controlling it. It's whether you choose to lock everything down and what your corporate, strategic policy is going to be on that. It's hard to revoke everything all at one time. It can be done. But understanding what's there, talking to the business, understanding what they're using these tools for, is it necessary? Having the awareness over it is, and being aware that people are doing this, and the business itself understanding what their staff are doing. So those are, it's having the conversations and starting those conversations, and the tools can help with that. And it can lock it down as well.
Yeah, yeah, rightly said. So I'd like to turn to Ali, and before you ask you the question, I believe there was a case reported to the Privacy Commissioner's office in which an employee of a company, I don't want to disclose the name of the company over here, had erroneously downloaded PHI, and that information fell into the wrong hands. It was reported to the Privacy Commissioner's office. Now, given the fact that people are working from home right now and they might be accessing PHI from their endpoints, and they might be printing it, or they might be handling it in a way which it should not be handled. So from the healthcare perspective, I mean, what's your approach? Because you're caught in a pretty odd position. I mean, you're talking about ease of doing business, but you're also talking about protecting information and protecting data. So what's your take on oversight on shadow IT, and is it possible, or if it is, what's the best possible way of doing so?
Well, I have more divided type of opinion on this. To be honest, if I think that if we can have oversight over it, it's not considered to be any more shadow IT. So we do have some sort of control over it. We have some sort of understanding on this. But going back to what you mentioned about the working remote and accessing, for instance, in this example, PHI and all of that. Well, I go back to, I'm coming from an education background, and I'm a strong believer in training and awareness, the very first layer of defense, because no matter what we put in place, what type of controls we have in place, regardless of those, if the users are unaware of what they are doing and what they are putting at risk without knowledge, no matter what we do, what we have in place, it's going to break, and we are going to have the challenges. So most of those basically the threats are coming toward the lack of knowledge from the user point of view. Now it has become much harder to manage the access and all of that. Specifically, we talk about MDM, mobile device management. But at the same time, the reality is that let's say in this pandemic that we are dealing with, and we are trying to, at the same time, we are talking about, the reality is that there is a rule of thumb that we are saying that humans' life overrides privacy in health sector. So if there is a situation that we are talking about saving humans' life versus privacy, we go for saving humans' life first. We don't care whether privacy is going to be at risk or not at that moment. So in this situation, for example, the bring your own device, the BYOD concept, has become one of the necessities because organizations weren't ready to be in such an environment that they are going to all of a sudden become all remote workers. And even from the VPN connectivity point of view, as soon as we started looking into the basically availability and all of that, when the pandemic has started, we had the issue because we knew that we have over 20,000 maybe practitioners in my own area that they needed to have access to the tools that we have and data. But at the same time, we didn't have the capacity for the VPN connectivity on that. So we had to become more and more creative again because we are saving lives and we have to do that. So the reality is that no matter what, especially when we are talking about the remote access and all of that, yes, we can still manage them. But at the end of the day, I think if we don't have the adequate training and awareness for very rigorous type of policies and enforcements in place, and auditing, because that's another key that we have to have in place. If we don't have those components, none of the technical the controls would be able to prevent an incident that you mentioned. I'm going to mention also one other aspect of shadow IT that it might be not considered as a shadow IT, but I really think it's a shadow IT. It's the vendor side. We had an incident recently in one of actually a couple of hospitals, and without mentioning the names. And we were informed by Interpol and basically OPP and RCMP of the activities going on. And once we started the investigation, we saw that it wasn't actually the hospital system, but the back door to the hospital was done through one of the vendors that it was providing a commercial type of basically service to the hospital. Goes back to similar to Home Depot incident, but it was Target, I believe. So if you look at those, all of those back doors and side doors to the environments came from vendors that the IT departments and centralized IT department, they had no oversight over them. They had no idea, no control over them. Just they could escalate their privileges, come into the corporate side or wherever. So when we are talking about this, we need to consider basically all aspects of this internally and externally, who we are dealing with, and we put them on the hook and make them liable through the very restricted agreements that we have with them. That's my take.
No, I think you've highlighted a really key point over here, and I think one of the key drivers behind shadow IT is the ease of doing business and let's just say the false sense of security, which is being communicated by these service providers. Like just the fact that any departmental head can just use their credit card to subscribe to a service opens a can of worms. And the thing is that, I mean, in my opinion, I mean, whatever shadow IT instances I have seen so far, 95% of them are people subscribing to various SaaS services. 95%.
So actually, Farooq, I've got a good example of that is that, some organizations have actually gone to the extent of auditing their credit card statements. And if they're not in the vendor management system, it's not getting approved.
Oh, that's a good control.
That's actually a really, really good control, because that way, at least if it goes through the vendor management system, the whole risk management procurement aspect of it, then it's gone through the appropriate processes. But if it hasn't, then all of a sudden when the bill doesn't get paid, somebody starts screaming about it. So, things come to light at that point. And it's actually an
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's the point which I wanted to turn towards is that we spoke about the people aspect when Ali said that there needs to be good awareness. And then initially, Sandra, you and me were talking about technology. And then you brought in the aspect of processes. So I'd like to turn it over to Michael. I mean, what kind of processes or frameworks can we have in place to ensure that let's just say that let's not use the word oversight over here, but making sure that there is some kind of a due diligence or some kind of a process in place to make sure that even if some department is going to be subscribing to some service, they need to follow some set of guidelines. So can you just
Right.
shed some light on what kind of processes do we need to have in organizations?
Right. So Sandra brought up one of them is the financial auditing piece, but right back to security awareness at the beginning is when we do security awareness, this is typically not something that we talk about. We don't talk about shadow IT in those awareness programs. We don't talk about the understanding that a new website that you need to sign up for as a service to your business is something that we need to be security conscious about. So adding that in there, and having attestations on a quarterly basis. So as a business head owner or the manager of a line of business, where are your employees going to conduct business? What systems are you using? Are you aware of all the systems that you're using? Are you approving it? Are you vetting it?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think we're talking more about due diligence, and
Yeah.
one of the things that we are discussing in higher education right now is making sure that the procurement departments or the legal folks should be aware of the key controls that they should be asking the vendor about, because often at times IT is not even involved in the procurement process.
Right.
It's the people in the procurement department or the legal department or the financial services department who are the ones who are actually reviewing the agreements. So if there is some kind of an awareness for those people, because I mean, we can't just, I mean, in most of the cases, I mean, business feels that they don't want to bring IT into the conversation just because of the general sense they have about going for cloud services. But I think it could be turned back to them from the awareness perspective that what are the best practices associated with.
So one of the things that we've actually done is we've created a software as a service guideline for our business users, and it outlines all of those questions to ask. And so, before you actually even, start down the path of signing up with them, there's a whole series of questions from a risk management perspective, again, data residency, single sign-on, there's technical, there's functional, non-functional requirements. And also what we've done is we've also done an inclusion in as an appendix to standardized wording from a legal perspective as well. And so we've got a workflow in place for that. But this actually, gives the business users an understanding of what they need to look for. And then we also incorporate the same series of questions as part of our vendor management procurement process as well. And if, going to RFQ, RFI, things like that.
Okay. I think that's a really good practice.
There's also, so 10 years ago, if you, as a line of business, needed an application, if you needed something done that would facilitate business, you had to go to IT because they had to implement it in the data center somewhere. Now
You don't need it.
yeah, you don't need them, and it's not that IT is not needed. It's just it's a different role now.
Yeah.
And if I may add, going back to what Sandra mentioned about the agreement part of it, we have tried to do the same thing. We have started enforcing some language into the procurements and the agreements that now different departments want to sign. And we are actually funneling this through the actual procurement departments, not because they can go over and be us and around us through the IT or security event aspect. We have big teams, but the reality is that at the end of the day, we came back, we said, you know what, we need to have this enforced somewhere. And that enforcement is within the legal language and the agreements that we have put together, making sure that either if they want to do that, even the vendors who are going to come to us, we are putting it the way that they are going to agree to either provide us a PIA TRA at the end, even if that's the case, and we give them a leeway that, you know what, you have done 6 months. If there is any type of risks identified, you have to fix it. If not, we are going to be out. So I think the world has changed, as Michael and Sandra mentioned, and it's not anymore enforcement through the on-prem type of implementation, saying, you know what, you cannot bypass me, you have to come to me. The reality is that everyone is now able to go and sign any piece of, and as an executive, just sign, they have a signing authorities, and they just sign and say, oh, you know what, regardless, and they don't consider the fact that they might violate the enterprise level security and privacy policies and procedures.
Right. I think
It's
that
all about raising the security consciousness within the organization, the business being involved. You know, it's collaboration, it's working together
Yes.
to achieve a common goal. And you know, as we all talk about, it's training, it's awareness training, and including that as part of it. You know, it's shifting to, you know, the business versus just our hardcore security training, but we have to incorporate all of the business perspectives into it as well today. And of course, privacy as well, legal. So, you know, we look at it from a holistic, integrated approach to include security, privacy, and legal up front at the beginning of projects versus at the end, because it's a lot easier to fix it during than it is trying to retrofit anything later on.
Sandra, you spoke about the process that you have developed in your company.
Mhm.
Have you guys also incorporated a control or question around asking these companies for a SOC 2 report?
Yes. Oh yeah, that's included in it. So we have an entire questionnaire that we will give out to vendors, and even from a business perspective. So the SaaS guideline for our business users, that's one of the items in there. So it's basically their checklist of questions to ask before you even start going down the path. Because if they're not meeting our minimum set of requirements, then there's really no point to engage any further.
Yeah, good point. In fact, we're having this debate in the higher education sector about reliance on SOC 2 reports, and one of the colleges, they made a really interesting statement. They said that the SOC 2 report talks more about security of the cloud and doesn't talk much about security in the cloud. So, yeah.
Well, you have to remember that you're dealing with a shared service model.
Mhm.
So depending on how the application, what you're buying, what your service is, you know, there's two components. If the vendor is using the cloud, depending on what they're relying on from a, you know, cloud service provider, yes, they may have the controls in place. And what I've seen in quite a few cases is if you have an application, they rely on the vendor in the cloud, their platform, but actually their entire system doesn't necessarily have a SOC report, or they don't, you know, they haven't gone through the pen testing, they haven't gone through the vulnerability analysis. So it's really, and you also have to be careful of what system it's reading those reports to make sure it's actually the right application or the right system. And even with PCI reports, making sure it's actually the system that you're buying and not a different one. So, you know, you have to spend time to understand the architecture as well. Because I know I've talked to a lot of vendors and they say, oh yes, well, we've got, you know, SOC reports for X, Y, and Z. And it's like, yeah, okay, what about your app? Right? So tell me about your application. I'm not worried about the other guys. I'm worried about what you're actually doing. Do you and I think that's where you actually have to engage in conversation with the vendors and understand, you know, their security posture. You know, do they have a security department? You know, if they say no, it's kind of, you know, red flags. And I hate to say it, it all goes back to a gut feel. You know whether or not when you engage with the CTO of an organization, this comes into play particularly with startups. You know, you can get a sense whether they actually have their hand on the pulse of security, how they're doing things, versus it's a complete left field for them. And, I always say, go with your gut, and also have the right to audit as well.
Yeah.
Right?
A simple question for them is ask them what their incident response plan is.
Yep. What their business continuity plan is.
Yeah.
Right?
And
there's a lot of telltale questions that you can ask, and that can either. But you know what? Sometimes even if they don't, depending on what the system is, you have to make a risk judgment to say, yes, this is a really cool service. We're going to use it, but we're not putting any data in it. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. There are positive aspects to it. And you do a risk assessment to understand the impact on your organization if that particular company is breached and what data they will be holding. So it's not, I don't like to say it's black and white. It's never, it's always shades of gray, and understanding what can happen.
That's a good point. And I think, Sandra, the point that you highlighted about right to audit is should be there. And I know that SaaS providers often push back on that, but I think there should be a clause about right to audit. So rightly said. So let's switch gears now. Let's now start talking about what needs to change in terms of attitude of IT leadership and security leadership towards business. So the question that I have is that, can the amount of shadow IT be reduced by CIOs listening better and showing more flexibility? And I would like to pose it, more empathy to it. So, Michael, what's your take on that?
Right. So absolutely. And I'm going to preface that I work with smaller businesses now. So they're a little more integrated. However, they still have this misunderstanding about the amount of security that they're going to have. And so having the conversations with them and educating the stakeholders that are going to be investing in these strategies, making sure that they understand what risks that they're taking and help them through it. So again, from a security perspective, if you're in the ministry of no, they're not going to come to you at all. So it's better to help them make their solution work than to just tell them that no and get in their way.
Okay. So just being devil's advocate right now. So the first thing which people hear is no, but the second thing is that they get a long list of questions from the CIO or from the CISO saying that, okay, can you just go through this checklist? And they even want to avoid that. So Sandra, what's the best possible way of avoiding all this? I mean, a more efficient way.
It's really about building a security culture and being a data-centric organization and understanding the importance of your data. And it's not ramming down people's throats. It's actually being collaborative. And again, it's raising the level of understanding throughout the organization. You either have a grassroots level going from bottom up, or you have a top down to say security in our data is important and we need to do the right things. And it means listening to people and not being the one who's saying no all of the time, but saying, how can we help you? What can we do? Mm-hmm. There's always a solution. And it's really the perceptions of IT departments. And I think it's come a long way. IT has to be an integrated part of the business. It's not a silo.
Yeah. And they should be seen as a business enabler.
A business enabler and a leader as well. And it's about leadership. It's about being at the table when the business is making decisions, and an integrated part of that.
So Ali, what's your take on this, and what steps are you guys taking to make sure that the perception about IT leadership around shadow IT changes?
Well, to be honest, the reality is that IT is there to serve the business, And if what IT is unable to actually understand the real requirements of a business needs and how it's operating, no matter what, it's going to be a challenge. And I have always said that IT should not dictate how to run the business. Business is dictating how to run the business. IT, just as you mentioned, needs to be just an enabler. The security has been always considered to be the roadblock when it comes in between IT and business side. And they always, one of the other aspects is that the CIOs look at it, oh, you know what, I'm going to get a hit again to the security roadblock and I need to bypass that. And then again goes back to where they come back with the even shadow IT or non-compliant type of solutions that they come into the game, regardless, because the agility, as Michael mentioned, is now the need of nowadays operation. So the reality is that if the IT department doesn't understand, number one, the real business requirements and what they are trying to achieve and how they need to operate, there is a big gap. And that's where we are going to have the break between these two. And at the same time, if the security side is not adjusting itself to match the speed of the business requirements and the IT, and always stay restricted on the specific path, saying that no, you have to do it my way or other way, is not going to be possible. Then there is always this, we are going to deal with this problem. And either IT is going to bypass security, or the users or the departments are going to bypass both IT and security. So the reality is that we need to just be more flexible, listen, as you mentioned, and make sure that whatever we are doing is aligned with the business needs and what they are trying to achieve, rather than being, again, roadblocks and showstoppers. We need to become real enablers and step, even the agility in the security side, when we are talking about even the project and let's say the developments going on with the software side. If you want to be in a SDLC type of mentality all the time, well, it doesn't work anymore in these days, and everything is agile methodology.
Mhm.
Security has been always a issue in there, and now we need to adjust the security model to work with the agile methodology, rather than we push them toward the SDLC that they don't want to do that. So these are the things that goes back all the way to, again, to the understanding the business and how we can help them to achieve their jobs easier and in a secure manner.
Okay, so we are at the tail end of our conversation, and the last question that I have for the panel is, and this is a question for each panelist, and what's one recommendation that you would like to give to your audience as to how CISOs, CIOs, and business heads can make shadow IT a net positive for business? So, Michael, what's your one suggestion or one tip?
Yeah, so simply joining the communication and having regular conversations with your business as to, what are you using today to facilitate your business? Is there anything new that you're looking at? What is it going to look like in the next year? So are there things that we need to do to help you get your business operational technology-wise?
Okay, Sandra.
Yeah, I mean, it's the conversation and working with them on their journey, their business journey, understanding exactly, what their requirements are. Also the awareness, having security awareness around shadow IT, and not posing it from a negative perspective, but from a positive, saying that if you need, if you're looking at new applications, software as a service, make sure you include the IT department, the security team. Having a positive spin in an environment versus having the security typical old school mentality of, I'm calling you out on it. It's having the positive attitude towards everything. You get more bees with honey.
Oh, yes, indeed. No, couldn't agree more with that. Ali, what's your take?
Definitely, whatever Sandra and Michael said, I can second them. And basically, the positive attitude and making sure that the business side and the IT side don't look at the what we are bringing to the table is just we are here to help them. We are not here to point fingers at them and say that, you know what, this happened, and bringing up some incentives for them by showing that how we can help them. The IT can help them actually to basically enable or save some time for them. Let's say if they are using different type of personal tools or whatever, if we show them, the conversation goes right into the conversation that, you know what, you don't have backup, you don't have protection in there. If something happens, you are going to be on the hook for that tomorrow. I think by having such conversations, it's going to be much easier to manage such or reduce or remove shadow ITs from the environments.
Agree with that. So what I'm hearing is having a more proactive approach, having a more business-centric approach, and I think I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I also heard was security by design or privacy by design, right? Because if you have security incorporated since the inception of any process or product, something, and of course, and also making all the stakeholders responsible for it, because at the end of the day, security and privacy and all these things are not the responsibility of security and compliance. It's a business initiative. So I think it has got a lot to do with awareness and a change in culture or tweaking culture too, right? So that's thanks a lot. And I do see some questions popping up. So the first question that I see on the screen is that, is your perspective that employees should not be using their own environments for corporate work?
Can I answer that one, Farooq?
Yeah, yeah.
So I had actually put together at the beginning of COVID, I'd put together a training, awareness training for end users to basically protect their home environment. And it went through, managing their routers and using the guest network on their router specifically for their corporate use. So their laptops and their SIP phone and their printer, segregating it off from the rest of their home network, So allowing them or teaching them how to use what they have at home in a more secure fashion. Okay.
Sandra and Ellie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's important for them to understand their own infrastructure, but is this in regards to using their own corporate laptops? So it comes down to a organizational decision on whether or not, from a MDM perspective, whether or not you're going to allow having non-corporate devices access systems, and then how do you actually protect those? Do you actually, if you are using non-corporate, a lot of organizations will make sure that there's an appropriate level of antivirus on there when the systems actually connect. They will install certain tools, so you have some controls over it. So it kind of depends. There are ways to be able to do it, but it's really a risk tolerance perspective from the organization and the data that you're holding.
And that goes back to BYOD, right? Like,
yeah,
even
it's BYOD. Yeah.
But at the same time, it can be personal devices and within the corporate environment that, let's say I bring my mobile device and I want to now hook it up to the corporate, basically Wi-Fi or access points, that is going to introduce risks to the environments. So either we can enforce the different type of technical policies and basically controls in there. In addition to that, we can also make sure that the employees are aware of basically the policy that they are not allowed, or they are allowed, either way, and how they need to maintain the minimum level of securities and segregate the environments. As Michael, you mentioned, even if they are bringing their own devices into the corporate environment, we need to make sure that they are separated and segregated from the corporate environments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and right before I go to the next question, I attended a conference just 3 months before the pandemic, where Teresa Payton, the former CISO of the White House, was speaking, and she spoke about the best practices of securing your home, and she was talking about having network segments in your home, having separate network segments for your IoT devices, separate for your own devices, your endpoints and a separate one for your children. But
IoT.
yeah, so having the same network segmentation like you do at your corporate network. So yeah. So next question is that what about data backup practices? If employees are backing up to their own environment, especially in these virtual times, is that necessarily a red flag?
Yeah.
100%.
So employees should not be backing up corporate data on their personal device,
Mhm.
right?
No, the corporate infrastructure should be taking care of the backups. So,
Yeah.
you've got all of your cloud service providers that, you're already backing things up, or you have backup strategy in place for that. So no, they should not be doing that.
Okay, that's definitely a red flag. In
Yep.
fact,
Oh yeah.
I would go to the extent of saying that there should be sufficient controls to even prevent that.
Prevent that. Yes.
So
And that goes back to identity and context that we never really talked about is identity is the perimeter now that we don't have this defense in depth of our corporate infrastructure. So if we're managing identity and its context appropriately, then even if they're using their personal devices, they should not be able to back up data on that device.
Or even if we consider, sorry, just also the most common attack vector right now, which is a ransomware. And if you look at that, and if there are any payloads inside in those backups, actually, well, we are putting everything at risk.
for sure, yeah. And I think tools like DLP tools that could be in place. I know, Michael, you're a big fan of the zero trust architecture. Now, and I'm not even sure if how can we make that model efficient when we're talking about users working remotely. But I think that could be a good control to it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's striving towards zero trust. It's a long road, it is. But if you're starting with identity models and context, that's a good direction forward. And then roles-based access to your data.
Mhm.
No, yeah, this was a really good discussion, everybody, and I wish we had more time, but I think we touched on all the right points. I mean, and I hope the audience will have lots to take away from this conversation. But thank you, Michael, thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Ali, for sharing your perspective or your experience on this really interesting subject, shadow IT. And I think we'll see shadow IT in different forms, shapes, and sizes in the coming years and months.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.
Thank
Talk
you.
soon.
Have a good evening.
Take care.